This is Amber, my little sister. She's the unsuccessful one." Those words hung in the air like poisonous smoke as I stood frozen in my sister Diane's sleek downtown penthouse, a champagne flute clutched tightly in my hand. The elegant crowd of finance executives in designer suits and cocktail dresses turned to assess me with polite smiles that couldn't mask their pity. I felt the familiar sting of humiliation creeping up my neck, but years of practice had taught me how to maintain my composure in these moments. Little did my sister know that in exactly 7 days, I would be announced as the new Chief Innovation Officer at Meridian Capital Partners, the very firm where she'd spent a decade climbing the corporate ladder and where she now served as a senior vice president. Her boss. I was about to become her boss. But the story of how I ended up walking into my sister's extravagant housewarming party that night, only to leave with a shattered relationship and an unexpected opportunity, didn't begin with an invitation or even with her dismissive introduction. It began much earlier, in the modest 4-bedroom colonial in suburban Connecticut where Diane and I grew up. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Our childhood home in Westport sat on a tree-lined street where success was measured in SAT scores and college acceptance letters. Our parents, Dad, a thoracic surgeon at Yale New Haven Hospital, Mom, a corporate attorney, had established a household where achievement wasn't celebrated. It was expected. Diane was 4 years older than me, and from the beginning, she was everything I wasn't. Organized where I was creative, methodical where I was intuitive. She collected academic accolades like some kids collected baseball cards, valedictorian, National Merit Scholar, full ride to Princeton. Her path was always crystal clear: prestigious university, top-tier investment bank, corner office by 35. I, on the other hand, frustrated our parents' expectations at every turn. It wasn't that I was unsuccessful. I simply defined success differently. While Diane pursued finance with laser focus, I bounced between interests: digital marketing, app development, sustainability consulting. I preferred startups to corporations, innovation to tradition. After graduating from Boston University, not an Ivy, as my mother never failed to point out, I built a career identifying emerging market trends and helping companies pivot toward the future. "When are you going to find something stable, Amber?" Mom would ask during our monthly family dinners, while Dad nodded in agreement. Look at Diane, already handling accounts worth millions at Meridian Capital. What none of them understood was that I had found something stable: change itself. I'd developed a reputation for spotting market shifts before they happened, for understanding how technology would reshape industries before the industries themselves caught on. My consulting work had saved 3 different companies from obsolescence, though the credit usually went to the executives who'd hired me. The truth was, I earned more than Diane did, working fewer hours with more flexibility and genuine passion for my projects. But without the prestigious title or corner office, without the validation of an established hierarchy, my success remained invisible to my family. "It's just that we worry about your future," Dad would say, his concern genuine if misplaced. "Consulting isn't sustainable long-term. Those tech startups, they come and go." Diane never defended me during these conversations. Sometimes I caught a flicker of something in her eyes, not quite satisfaction, but something close to it. The comfort of knowing that in our family's unspoken competition, she was still winning. We maintained a superficial closeness through our 20s and early 30s. Birthday dinners, holiday gatherings, occasional Sunday brunches where conversation stayed safely in the shallow waters of weather and mutual acquaintances. I attended her wedding to Nathan, a partner at another investment firm, standing beside her in the pale blue bridesmaid dress she'd selected to ensure I wouldn't outshine her. I celebrated when she purchased her first luxury condo, then her waterfront summer home, then the downtown penthouse where we now stood. I never missed these milestones, but I noticed she rarely asked about mine. 3 months before Diane's housewarming party, I received an unexpected email from Lawrence Wheeler, the CEO of Meridian Capital Partners. He had heard about my work restructuring Volta Technologies, a renewable energy startup that had gone from near bankruptcy to acquisition target in 18 months under my guidance. Your approach to digital transformation and market adaptation is exactly what traditional financial institutions like ours need, he wrote. I'd like to discuss the possibility of creating a new role at Meridian, Chief Innovation Officer. Nearly deleted the email, assuming it was either spam or a misguided recruitment attempt. I had no interest in joining the corporate machine that had consumed my sister. But curiosity won out, and I agreed to coffee with Lawrence the following week. He was not what I expected. In his late 50s, with salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses, Lawrence spoke passionately about the existential challenges facing traditional investment firms in the age of fintech and decentralized finance. Most of our leadership team comes from the same background with the same training, the same worldview, he explained, stirring his black coffee. We're excellent at what we've always done. But what we've always done is becoming obsolete. We need someone who sees around corners, Amber. Someone who isn't afraid to dismantle systems that aren't serving us anymore. I listened, intrigued, despite myself. And the existing leadership team, they support this vision? Because transformation doesn't work without buy-in from the top. Lawrence's smile turned rueful. Some do. Others will need convincing. That's part of why I'm hiring for this position externally. Sometimes you need an outside perspective to shine a light on blind spots. I didn't say yes immediately. In fact, I spent weeks researching Meridian's market position, interviewing former employees, and developing a preliminary transformation strategy before I decided the opportunity was genuine. Throughout those conversations, I never mentioned my sister. I wanted to be considered solely on my own merits, not through any perceived nepotism or family connection. By the time Diane's housewarming invitation arrived, a heavy cream-colored card with gold foil lettering, I had accepted Lawrence's offer in principle, though we were still negotiating terms. My start date was set for the following month, and Lawrence had suggested keeping my hiring confidential until the formal announcement. Meridian was publicly traded, and news of a significant C-suite addition required careful timing. Looking forward to seeing you, little sis, Diane had written on the invitation. Come see how the other half lives. I should have known from that note alone what I was walking into, but some part of me still hoped that beneath the competition and comparison, there remained the sister who had once taught me to ride a bike, who had stayed up late helping with science projects, who had promised we'd always have each other's backs. I couldn't have been more wrong. Diane's penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of a gleaming glass tower overlooking Central Park. As the elevator climbed to the 42nd floor, I adjusted my outfit. A vintage Valentino jumpsuit I'd found at a consignment shop and tailored to perfection. I'd learned long ago that in Diane's world, appearances mattered above all else. The doors opened directly into a marble foyer where a uniformed attendant collected coats and handed out champagne. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Manhattan skyline like a living painting, the city lights competing with the crystal chandeliers that flooded the space with warm light. Amber! Diane's voice carried across the room as she glided toward me, elegant in a black sheath dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her hair was swept into a sleek chignon, diamond studs glittering at her ears. The pair our parents had given her when she was made vice president at Meridian. The place is beautiful, I said, accepting her air kiss. Congratulations. Can you believe the view? Nathan negotiated directly with the developer. We got in before it even hit the market. She looped her arm through mine, guiding me deeper, into the crowd. Come meet everyone. Some very important people are here tonight. I recognized several faces from financial news segments and magazine profiles, the upper echelon of New York's investment world. A U.S. senator stood chatting with the CEO of a global shipping company. The chief financial officer of a pharmaceutical giant was comparing watch complications with a tech billionaire near the bar. "This is Marcus Chandler, head of emerging markets, at Goldman," Diane said, stopping before a silver-haired man with steel-rimmed glasses. "And his wife, Patricia. Marcus serves on 3 boards with Nathan." I shook their hands, making appropriate small talk about the recent market volatility in Southeast Asian currencies, a subject I'd been researching for a client. Marcus looked mildly surprised at my insights. "You work in finance as well?" he asked. Before I could answer, Diane laughed, a tinkling sound that somehow managed to be dismissive without seeming overly rude. "This is Amber, my little sister. She's the unsuccessful one." She patted my arm, as if to soften the blow. "She does some kind of consulting for startups. Very creative, but you know how unstable those ventures can be." The Chandlers offered polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes, clearly reassessing my value in the room. Marcus glanced over my shoulder, already looking for his next, more advantageous conversation. "I specialize in digital transformation and emerging technologies," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice remained. "I've helped several companies pivot their business models to adapt to market disruptions." "How interesting," Patricia murmured, clearly finding it anything but. "Diane, have you seen the Harringtons tonight? We're meant to discuss that fundraiser for the symphony." And just like that, I was dismissed. As they moved away, Diane squeezed my arm. "Don't take it personally," she whispered. "These people only care about big institutions. Next time, maybe just say you're between opportunities. They'll assume. You're living off a trust fund." I extricated my arm from her grip. "I'm not ashamed of my work, Diane." "Of course not, sweetie. I just don't want you feeling awkward." She glanced toward the door where new guests were arriving. "Oh, there's Melanie from compliance. Grab yourself some food. The caterer is the same one who did the Abramowitz wedding last month." She was gone before I could respond, leaving me alone in a sea of people who had already decided I wasn't worth their attention. I made my way to the bar, ordering sparkling water instead of more champagne. I needed clarity tonight, not the fuzzy comfort of alcohol. As the bartender prepared my drink, I felt someone slide onto the stool beside me. "You must be Amber Collins." I turned to find Lawrence Wheeler watching me with a thoughtful expression. My future CEO was dressed casually compared to the other guests. A simple navy blazer over a light blue shirt, no tie. In this room of people, trying so hard to impress each other, his confidence was refreshing. "Mr. Wheeler," I said, surprised. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Lawrence, please. Nathan and I serve on the Economic Club board together." He accepted a scotch from the bartender. "I didn't realize you and Diane were related." "We don't advertise it," I replied carefully. "I prefer to be judged on my own merits." His eyes crinkled, at the corners. "I can understand that, especially after that charming introduction I just overheard." Heat crept up my neck. "You heard that?" "The unsuccessful one." Not very sisterly. He took a sip of his scotch. "Particularly ironic, given that I've spent the last month trying to convince you to help us reinvent a century-old financial institution." I studied the bubbles in my water glass. Diane measures success differently than I do. "Most of the people in this room do?" Lawrence observed, gazing around at the gathering. "Big titles, prestigious addresses, the right schools, the right clubs. It's a narrow definition, but an effective one in certain circles." Lawrence turned back to me, his expression suddenly serious. "Do you know why I want you at Meridian, Amber?" I raised an eyebrow. "You mentioned something about seeing around corners." "It's more than that. The financial world is facing a moment of reckoning. Technology is democratizing access to capital. Younger investors don't trust traditional institutions, with good reason after 2008. everyone in this room thinks the solution is to hold tighter to the old ways, to protect the existing power structures. He leaned in slightly. But I believe the only companies that will survive are those willing to break their own business models before someone else does it for them. And you think I can help Meridian do that? I know you can. You've done it before, just on a smaller scale. He finished his scotch and set the glass down. The question is whether you're ready to step into this world, with all its politics and egos, and push for change that many will resist. Before I could respond, I felt a hand on my shoulder. Diane had appeared beside us, her smile gleaming but her eyes sharp. "Lawrence, I see you've met my little sister." Her voice was honeyed, but I caught the note of confusion beneath it. "I hope she's not boring you with her tech theories." "On the contrary," Lawrence replied smoothly. "We've been having a fascinating discussion about the future of finance. Your sister has some revolutionary ideas." Diane's grip on my shoulder tightened imperceptibly. "How unexpected. Amber's always been the family dreamer." She laughed. "Remember your plan to start that sustainable fashion marketplace, Amber? Or was it a fair trade coffee app? I lose track of all your ventures." "Actually, both of those projects were quite successful," I said quietly. "The fashion marketplace was acquired last year by a European retail group." Lawrence raised his eyebrows, clearly impressed. "You didn't mention that in our discussions." "It wasn't relevant to the transformation strategy we were developing," I explained. Diane looked between us, her practiced smile faltering. "Discussions? What discussions?" I saw the exact moment Lawrence realized the situation, that Diane had no idea he'd been recruiting me. His expression shifted from surprise to careful neutrality. "Just some informal conversations about industry trends," he said diplomatically. "Your sister has valuable insights about how traditional firms like Meridian might adapt to changing market conditions." Diane's laugh was brittle. "How adorable. But Lawrence, if Meridian needs consultation on innovation strategy, you should really speak with our strategy team first. Internal resources before external vendors. It's in the company handbook." "I'll keep that in mind," Lawrence replied, standing. "Amber, I look forward to continuing our conversation. Diane, congratulations on the beautiful home." As he walked away, Diane turned to me, her smile gone. "What exactly is going on between you and my CEO?" I met her gaze steadily. "Nothing inappropriate, if that's what you're implying." "Then why is he discussing Meridian's strategy with my little sister instead of with me? I'm a senior vice president. Innovation initiatives should come through my division." A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. In that moment, I saw what Diane couldn't: her fear. Beneath the perfectionism and achievement, beneath the designer clothes and prestigious address, lay a deep-seated insecurity. She'd spent her life climbing a ladder, convinced that each rung represented safety and value. And now, sensing a threat to that carefully constructed identity, she was revealing just how fragile it all was. "Maybe," I said carefully, "he's looking for perspectives from outside the traditional banking mindset." Her eyes narrowed. "Let me make something clear, Amber. Meridian Capital Partners is my territory. Whatever you think you're doing with Lawrence, Wheeler ends tonight. I've worked too hard to have my reputation compromised by my sister's networking games." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving me alone at the bar with the realization that the gulf between us was wider than I had ever imagined. The night air hit me like a welcome slap as I stepped out of Diane's building. I'd left the party early, making a quiet exit while my sister was surrounded by admirers cooing over her new Sub-Zero wine refrigerator. No goodbye seemed better than a forced one. A text from Lawrence arrived as I hailed a cab. "Sorry about that awkward moment. Didn't realize the family connection. Still on for Monday's final meeting?" I stared at the message, thumb hovering over the keyboard. The job at Meridian had seemed perfect just hours ago. A chance to make a real impact, to transform an institution from within. Now it was complicated by personal dynamics I hadn't anticipated. Taking this position meant directly challenging my sister's territory, becoming her superior in the hierarchy she valued above all else. Need some time to think. Will. Call tomorrow, I finally replied. The cab dropped me at my Brooklyn brownstone, a far cry from Diane's gleaming penthouse, but a home I genuinely loved. I'd purchased the garden-level apartment 3 years earlier when a project I'd consulted on went public, giving me my first real windfall. The space was modest by Manhattan standards, but filled with character. Exposed brick walls, original hardwood floors, a small but lush garden patio where I grew herbs and flowers in meticulously maintained raised beds. My phone rang as I unlocked the door. Mom. How was Diane's party? She asked without preamble. We wanted to fly in, but your father's conference in Phoenix couldn't be rescheduled. It was exactly what you'd expect, I said, kicking off my heels. Lavish, impressive, full of important people. Did you meet anyone interesting? Diane mentioned there would be several venture capital partners there. You know, they might be potential investors for whatever your next project is. I sank onto my sofa, suddenly exhausted. Mom, I'm not looking for investors. My consulting practice is doing well. Of course it is, honey. Her tone was the same one she used when I was 8, and insisting I could fly if I just flapped my arms hard enough. But wouldn't it be nice to have something more substantial? Security for your future? I have security, I said, trying to keep frustration from my voice. In fact, I've been offered a C-suite position at a major financial institution. Silence, then. Really? Which one? I hesitated, not ready to reveal the Meridian connection. I can't say yet. The announcement isn't public. Oh, Amber, that's wonderful news. The genuine excitement in her voice made my chest tighten. A proper executive role. Wait until I tell your father. Is it vice president? Executive director? Chief Innovation officer, I said quietly. Another pause. Chief, that's a C-level position? Like CFO or COO? Yes, Mom. Reporting directly to the CEO. The silence stretched longer this time. I could almost hear her recalibrating, adjusting the mental hierarchy she'd constructed with Diane perpetually at the top. Well, she finally said, this is unexpected. Wonderful, of course, but how did this happen so suddenly? It didn't. I've been in discussions for weeks, evaluating whether it's the right fit. And is it? She asked. The right fit? I stared up at my ceiling, watching the shadows from streetlights dance across the plaster. That's what I'm trying to figure out. After we hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine and stepped out to my small garden patio. The night was cool, the ambient city noise a comfortable background to my thoughts. My wind chimes, a housewarming gift I'd made from sea glass collected on Cape Cod, tinkled softly in the breeze. The truth was, I'd been trying to escape Diane's shadow my entire life. First, by rejecting her path entirely, forging my own way through startups and innovation. Later, by separating my professional identity from my family connections, making a name that stood entirely on its own merits. Taking the Meridian position would irrevocably link us again. It would thrust our relationship, with all its complicated history, into a professional context where the stakes were higher than family dinner awkwardness. It would force Diane to reckon with a reality she'd spent years denying, that my approach to success, though different from hers, was equally valid. Perhaps more so, in a rapidly changing financial landscape. Would it destroy what remained of our relationship? Or could it perhaps finally clear the air between us? My phone buzzed with a text from my friend Taylor. How was Sis's fancy party? Survival trophy earned? I smiled despite myself. Taylor had been my roommate in college and remained my closest confidant. She understood the Diane dynamic better than anyone. Worse than expected, I typed back. She introduced me as the Unsuccessful. 1. 3 dots appeared immediately. What? Oh, hell no. Do I need to come over with emergency ice cream? I'm fine. Actually, something interesting happened. Remember that job offer I told you about? The innovation thing at the big finance place? Turns out it's at Meridian, where Diane works. The 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times before her response came through. Holy. Plot. Twist. Does she know? She knows I was talking to her CEO. I don't know about the offer. What are you going to do? That was the question, wasn't it? What was I going to do? I took a deep breath of the night air, letting the scent of my rosemary plants center me. Then I dialed Lawrence's number. He answered on the second ring. Amber, I was hoping to hear from you. I need to understand something before I make my final decision, I said, skipping pleasantries. Did you know Diane was my sister when you approached me about this position? No, he replied without hesitation. Your maiden name is listed on your professional materials. Collins, not Harrington. She took your stepfather's name. You didn't. I had no idea until tonight. That matched what I knew to be true. After our biological father left when I was 3, Mom had remarried Robert Harrington when I was 6. Diane, 10 at the time, had eagerly adopted his name. I'd kept Collins, a small act of loyalty to the father who'd maintained only sporadic contact over the years. Does it change anything for you? I asked. The fact that I'd be Diane's superior? Lawrence was quiet for a moment. Organizationally, no. The CIO position oversees all innovation initiatives across departments, including those in Diane's division. Politically, it complicates things. Office dynamics can affect execution, and I won't pretend otherwise. She'll see it as a betrayal, I said, voicing the fear that had been growing since I left the party. Perhaps initially, Lawrence acknowledged. But Amber, I'm not offering you this role to create family drama. I'm offering it because Meridian needs exactly your expertise and perspective to navigate the next decade. The question is whether you believe you can be effective despite the personal complication. I watched a moth flutter around my patio light, drawn inexorably to its glow despite the danger. I've spent my career helping companies embrace difficult transformations, I said slowly. The human element is always the most challenging. People resist change, especially when it threatens their status or familiar ways of working. And yet, you've been remarkably successful at navigating those exact challenges, Lawrence noted. Yes, but I've never had to navigate them with my sister. If you decide this is too personal, I'll understand, Lawrence said. But I hope you'll consider that sometimes the most meaningful growth comes from our most difficult challenges. After we hung up, I sat in my garden until the night air grew too cool, turning the decision over in my mind. The logical part of me understood that this opportunity aligned perfectly with my professional goals. The emotional part dreaded the inevitable confrontation with Diane. Near midnight, my phone buzzed with another text. This one from Diane. You left without saying goodbye. Mom says you have exciting news. Call me tomorrow. I stared at the message, reading between the carefully composed lines. She was fishing for information, trying to discern what I might have told our mother. The old Amber would have responded immediately, apologizing for leaving early, deflecting, questions, maintaining the peace. But as I looked at those words glowing on my screen, something shifted inside me. Maybe it was the lingering sting of the unsuccessful one, or maybe it was simply years of diminishment finally reaching critical mass. Whatever the cause, I found myself setting the phone down without replying. Some questions deserved to wait for their answers, and some decisions, once made, needed to be announced properly, not explained apologetically. I already knew what I was going to do. Monday morning arrived with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I'd spent Sunday preparing, not just for my final, meeting with Lawrence and Meridian's board, but for the seismic shift that would follow my acceptance of their offer. My apartment had become a war room of sorts. On my dining table lay the comprehensive transformation strategy I'd developed for Meridian, flowcharts mapping the organizational structure, timelines for implementation phases, detailed analyses of competitors who'd successfully pivoted in the digital age. Alongside these professional materials sat a more personal document, a handwritten list titled Diane, Scenarios and Responses. I'd spent hours anticipating her reactions, planning how to navigate the inevitable confrontation professionally rather than emotionally. This wasn't about sibling rivalry anymore. It was about stepping into a leadership role with integrity and purpose. As I dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail, my phone lit up with a calendar reminder. Final interview, Meridian Capital, 10 a.m. Though, interview wasn't quite accurate anymore. This meeting was a formality, a chance for the board to ask final questions before making the official offer. My doorbell rang precisely at 8:30. I opened it to find Taylor standing there with 2 cups of coffee and a paper bag that smelled of cinnamon. Pre-battle sustenance, she announced, striding in without waiting for an invitation. Plus moral support, strategic counsel, and whatever else you need before you go become a corporate badass. How did you know I'd need this? I asked, accepting the coffee gratefully. Taylor, a litigation attorney whose courtroom confidence had always inspired me, rolled her eyes. Because I know you. You've been overthinking this all weekend. She gestured toward my dining table. Case in point. She examined my strategy documents while I bit into the still warm cinnamon roll she'd brought. This is impressive, she admitted, flipping through the organizational flowcharts. But it's this that worries me. She tapped the Diane scenarios list. I need to be prepared, I defended myself. Prepared, yes. Obsessed, no. She sat across from me, her expression softening. Amber, you've earned this opportunity through your own merit. You didn't seek it out to spite Diane. You didn't even know she'd be affected when you started the process. That doesn't change how it will look to her. Or to my parents. Taylor took a sip of her coffee. Maybe it's time to stop caring how things look to people who've never really seen you. The simple truth in her words struck me with unexpected force. How much of my life had been structured around seeking validation from those who measured success by metrics that didn't matter to me? How many opportunities had I evaluated through the distorting lens of my family's approval? What if I'm making a mistake? I asked quietly. Taking this job means walking straight into a corporate battlefield with my sister on the opposing side. Maybe, Taylor conceded. Or maybe it's exactly the confrontation you both need to move past this dynamic. Besides, she added with a knowing smile, when have you ever backed down from a challenge because it was difficult? She was right. My entire career had been built on navigating complex transformations, helping organizations move through uncomfortable changes toward better versions of themselves. Perhaps it was time to apply those same principles to my own life. After Taylor left, I gathered my materials and called a car service. The drive from Brooklyn to Meridian's Midtown headquarters gave me time for one last review of my presentation and talking points. The driver, sensing my concentration, kept the radio low and the conversation minimal. As we crossed the Brooklyn Bridge, New York's skyline rose before us, glass towers catching the morning light. Somewhere in that forest of ambition and power was Diane, probably already at her desk, reviewing market reports or preparing for client meetings, unaware that her world was about to shift on its axis. I felt a momentary pang of sympathy. For all her accomplishments, for all her carefully curated success, Diane had always seemed afraid of failing, afraid of not measuring up, afraid of losing her place in the rigid hierarchy she'd devoted her life to climbing. That fear had driven her to diminish my choices, to frame my different path as somehow lesser than hers. What would she do when that hierarchy was suddenly inverted? Meridian Capital Partners occupied 20 floors of a sleek tower on Park Avenue. I'd visited twice before during the recruitment process, but today the gleaming lobby with its marble floors and modern art installations felt different. Today, I wasn't just a visitor. The receptionist directed me to the executive elevator bank. "Mr. Wheeler's assistant is expecting you, Ms. Collins." The 47th floor housed the executive offices and boardroom, a realm Diane had been striving to reach for a decade. The irony wasn't lost on me as Jessica, Lawrence's assistant, greeted me with professional warmth. "They're ready for you in the, Pearl Room," she said, leading me down a corridor lined with black and white photographs documenting Meridian's 100-year history. Men in suits signing documents, breaking ground on buildings, shaking hands with presidents and prime ministers. Very few women appeared in these images, a visual reminder of the institution's traditional power structure. The Pearl Room turned out to be a medium-sized conference room with spectacular views of Central Park. Around a polished table sat 7 people: Lawrence, 4 board members I recognized from my previous meeting, and 2 I didn't. "Amber, welcome," Lawrence said, rising to greet me. "I believe you've met most of our group, but let me introduce Eleanor Castillo, our Chief Legal Officer, and Marcus Reed, who heads our Risk Management Division." I shook hands with everyone, noting Eleanor's particularly appraising gaze. As the only other woman in the C-suite, she would be a critical ally, or potential obstacle, in the months ahead. "Before we begin," Lawrence continued once we were all seated, "I want to address the matter that came to light at the weekend. Amber Collins is, as some of you now know, the sister of Diane Harrington in our investment banking division." A murmur circulated around the table. Eleanor's eyebrow raised a fraction of an inch. "This connection was unknown to both parties during our initial recruitment discussions," Lawrence clarified. "I've spoken with our HR director and legal team. While there's no policy preventing family members from working at Meridian, the reporting structure creates a potential conflict that needs to be managed appropriately." Eleanor leaned forward. "To be clear, Diane Harrington would fall under the CIO's oversight for any innovation initiatives affecting her division?" "That's correct," Lawrence confirmed. "And Ms. Collins," Eleanor turned to me, "you feel you can maintain professional objectivity despite this personal connection?" I met her gaze steadily. "Throughout my career, I've helped organizations navigate sensitive transformations that affected people's roles, status, and identities within their companies. Maintaining professional boundaries while acknowledging human factors is the core of what I do." "That's not quite an answer," Eleanor observed shrewdly. "My relationship with my sister is complex," I acknowledged, deciding transparency would serve me better than evasion. "But I've never allowed personal feelings to compromise my professional judgment, and I won't start now. If anything, my familiarity with Meridian's culture through Diane gives me valuable insight into the challenges we'll face during transformation." Marcus Reed, the risk management executive, frowned slightly. "Nevertheless, it creates an unusual dynamic. Ms. Harrington has been with Meridian for nearly a decade. She has strong relationships throughout the organization. How do you plan to address potential resistance or perception of favoritism?" It was the question I'd been expecting, the one I'd prepared most thoroughly to answer. "With 3 concrete measures," I replied. "First, transparency. I'll disclose the relationship to all stakeholders and establish clear protocols for handling matters involving my sister's division. Second, governance. I propose creating an oversight committee including HR and legal to review any decisions affecting investment banking to ensure objectivity. And third, metrics. Every aspect of our transformation strategy will be measured against established KPIs, creating accountability that transcends personal relationships." Eleanor nodded slightly, seemingly impressed by the thoroughness of my response. Lawrence looked pleased. "Well reasoned," Marcus acknowledged. But let's be practical. The moment this announcement goes public, people will talk. The optics are unusual at best. The financial industry is facing unprecedented disruption, I countered. Technological innovation, changing consumer expectations, regulatory pressure, all demanding responses. Are we more concerned with optics or outcomes? Because if Meridian wants to lead through this transformation rather than merely survive it, unconventional thinking will be required. A moment of silence followed my words. Then Eleanor Castillo smiled, a small, approving expression that transformed her severe features. I think, she said, looking around the table, Ms. Collins has just demonstrated precisely why Lawrence recommended her for this position. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur of technical questions and strategic discussions. By noon, we had covered my 90-day implementation plan, compensation package, and start date, the following Monday. Just 1 week after Diane's party, I would step into Meridian's C-suite, becoming the youngest executive in the company's history. We'll make the formal announcement this afternoon, Lawrence explained as we concluded. Company-wide email at 2 p.m., followed by a press release to the financial media at 3 p.m. I've scheduled a leadership team meeting for 1 p.m. to inform the department heads personally before the public announcement. A knot formed in my stomach. Will Diane be at that meeting? Lawrence shook his head. Only division heads in C-suite. Diane's one level below that as an SVP. But her boss, Thomas Barrett, will be there. I should tell her personally, I said, surprising myself with the offer. Before she hears it from Thomas or reads the email. Eleanor Castillo, who had remained after the other board members departed, raised an eyebrow. That's admirable, but potentially complicated. How do you think she'll react? Not well, I admitted. But she deserves to hear it from me, not through corporate channels. Lawrence and Eleanor exchanged glances. If you think that's best, Lawrence said cautiously. Just be aware that anything said between you two could complicate the transition. This needs to remain professional. I understand. I gathered my materials, suddenly eager to get the conversation over with. I'll head down to her office now. One more thing, Lawrence said as I reached the door. Whatever happens with Diane, remember why you're here. Meridian needs your vision. Don't let family dynamics derail that. I nodded, grateful for the reminder of what was truly at stake. The elevator ride to the 32nd floor, where investment banking operations were housed, gave me precious moments to collect my thoughts. I'd rehearsed various versions of this conversation all weekend, but standing on the threshold of actually having it sent adrenaline coursing through my system. The investment banking floor had a different energy than the executive level. Busier, louder, with rows of desks where analysts stared intently at multiple screens displaying market data. Glass-walled offices lined the perimeter for senior staff like Diane. I spotted her immediately through the glass of her corner office. She was standing behind her desk, gesturing emphatically while speaking to someone on her headset. Her Hermes scarf was perfectly knotted at her neck, her expression intense with the focused ambition that had always characterized her. As I approached, several heads turned. Though we didn't look alike, Diane had inherited our mother's tall, willowy frame and chestnut hair, while I had our biological father's more petite build and lighter coloring. Something in my purposeful stride must have caught their attention. Knocked lightly on Diane's doorframe. She glanced up, irritation flashing across her face before recognition hit. I'll have to call you back, she said curtly into her headset before removing it. Amber? What are you doing here? Her tone suggested I'd wandered into a military installation without clearance. I need to speak with you, I said, keeping my voice even. Privately. It's important. Diane checked her watch, a reflexive gesture I recognized from countless family gatherings. I have a client call in 10 minutes. Can this wait until tonight? I still haven't heard back about whatever news you shared with Mom. This will only take a few minutes. I closed the door behind me, acutely aware of curious glances from staff outside. Diane sighed, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. Fine. What's so urgent it couldn't wait for a phone call? I remained standing. I've accepted a position at Meridian. Her expression shifted from impatience to confusion, then to something like amusement. Here? At Meridian? In what capacity? Chief Innovation Officer. The words hung in the air between us. Diane stared at me, her carefully composed expression faltering as understanding dawned. That's not possible, she said finally. That position doesn't exist. It does as of today. Lawrence created it specifically to drive digital transformation across all divisions. Diane stood straighter, her fingers pressing against the polished surface of her desk. And you neglected to mention this during our conversation at my party? When I specifically asked what you were discussing with my CEO. It wasn't finalized then. Don't play semantics, Amber. You were in advanced discussions about a C-suite position at my company and deliberately kept me in the dark. Would you have preferred I leverage our relationship? Use you as a reference? I countered. I wanted this opportunity based on my own merits. Not because, or despite, being your sister. A flash of something like hurt crossed her face, quickly replaced by cool professionalism. When does this take effect? I start Monday. The announcement goes out company-wide at 2 p.m. today. Diane checked her watch again, a nervous tick now rather than a power move. So, in approximately 2 hours, everyone at Meridian will learn that my younger sister has been appointed to a position that outranks me. After 10 years of dedicated service, I get leapfrogged by someone with zero experience in institutional finance. I have extensive experience in digital transformation, which is what Meridian needs right now, I said, trying to keep the conversation focused on professional qualifications rather than our personal history. And the fact that this puts you in a position of authority over me? Diane's voice had taken on a dangerous calm. Was that a consideration in your decision, or just a convenient bonus? The accusation stung, even though I'd anticipated it. This isn't about you, Diane. It's about an opportunity that aligns with my expertise and professional goals. How admirably self-actualized of you, she replied, sarcasm evident. And what exactly will your first act as Chief Innovation Officer be? Dismantling the traditional banking structure I've helped build for the past decade? My first act will be assembling a cross-functional team to assess digital readiness across all divisions, I said, refusing to be baited into an emotional exchange. Your experience will be valuable in that assessment. I'm hoping we can work together professionally, despite our personal history. Diane laughed, a sharp, brittle sound devoid of humor. Professional? There's nothing professional about this situation. You hid this from me deliberately. You watched me introduce you to my colleagues, to Lawrence himself, as the unsuccessful one while knowing you were about to become my superior. The memory of that moment, the casual diminishment in front of people whose respect I would now need, sent a flush of heat to my face. Yes, I acknowledged quietly. I did. And perhaps that's precisely why we're having this conversation now. Because successful people don't need to diminish others to elevate themselves. Something flashed in Diane's eyes. Anger, certainly. But underneath it, something more complex. Before she could respond, her desk phone buzzed. Ms. Harrington, Thomas Barrett is looking for you. He says it's urgent. Diane pressed a button on the phone. Tell him I'll be right there. She looked back at me, composure reinstated like armor. It seems the leadership meeting is being called early. I assume they'll be introducing you. I wanted you to hear it from me first. How considerate. She straightened her scarf, a gesture so controlled it betrayed the turmoil beneath. Well, congratulations, little sister. You've finally found a way to prove yourself a successful one. I hope it brings you everything you think you want. As she brushed past me toward the door, I caught her arm gently. Diane, this doesn't have to be adversarial. We can find a way to work together that honors both our strengths. For a moment, something vulnerable flickered across her face. The shadow of the sister who had once taught me to ride a bike, who had helped me navigate the social minefields of middle school. Then it was gone, replaced by the polished executive who'd spent a lifetime proving her worth through achievement and status. "I have a meeting to attend," she said, pulling away. And apparently, a new boss to impress. As she walked away, shoulders, back and head high, I felt an unexpected admiration for her resilience, even as I recognized the defensive pride that had always kept us at arm's length. Whatever came next would be challenging for us both, but I was suddenly certain that this confrontation, painful as it was, had been long overdue. My phone buzzed with a text from Lawrence. "Leadership gathering in boardroom A now. Your presence is requested." It was time to step into my new role, not just professionally, but personally. Time to own my success without apology, to lead with confidence rather than conciliation. The path ahead would be complicated, but for the first time in years, it felt authentically mine. My first day at Meridian arrived with the kind of perfect autumn morning that seemed designed for new beginnings. Crisp air, clear skies, golden sunlight filtering through the city's skyscrapers. I'd spent the weekend preparing mentally and practically, reviewing organizational charts, department performance metrics, and technology assessment reports Lawrence had sent over. The company-wide announcement on Monday had generated exactly the buzz Lawrence had anticipated. Financial news outlets picked up the story immediately, framing it as Meridian's bold move toward digital transformation. My LinkedIn profile had exploded with connection requests from Meridian employees, industry analysts, and competitors curious about the newly created position. The fact that I was Diane's sister hadn't made it into the official press release, but internal gossip travels faster than official communications in any organization. By Friday afternoon, most of Meridian's 3,800 employees knew about our relationship, though the narrative varied wildly depending on who was telling the story. Now, as I stepped through Meridian's revolving doors, ID badge prominently displayed. On my charcoal suit, I was acutely aware of the scrutiny I faced, not just as a new executive, but as the outsider who'd seemingly bypassed years of corporate ladder climbing to land in the C-suite, and as the younger sister now outranking a respected SVP. "Good morning, Ms. Collins," the security guard greeted me with professional courtesy. "Mr. Wheeler asked that you go directly to the executive floor. Ms. Castillo is waiting to get you settled." The executive elevator whisked me to the 47th floor, where Eleanor Castillo stood waiting, elegant in a navy pantsuit, her silver-streaked black hair pulled into a sleek bun. "Right on time," she noted with approval. "I've always believed punctuality reveals character." "I agree," I replied, falling into step beside her as she led me down the corridor. "Especially on day one." Eleanor's expression softened slightly. "It won't be easy, you know. Executive transitions never are, but yours comes with unique complications." "I'm aware. Lawrence has assembled quite the welcome party for you," she continued, gesturing toward the boardroom ahead. "The entire C-suite, division heads, your direct reports, about 20 people in all. They're curious, some are skeptical, and a few are already positioning themselves either as allies or obstacles." I smiled at her directness. "And which are you, Eleanor?" She stopped walking, turning to face me fully. "I've been the only woman in Meridian's C-suite for 7 years. I've watched promising female leaders get sidelined because they couldn't navigate the politics or because they tried too hard to emulate the men. I'm neither an automatic ally nor an obstacle, Amber. I'm an observer. Impress me." With that, she pushed open the boardroom doors. The room fell silent as I entered. 24 faces turned toward me, most curious, some wary, a few openly hostile. Lawrence rose from his seat at the head of the table. "Everyone, please welcome Amber Collins, our new Chief Innovation Officer." The applause was polite but reserved. the standard reception for an unknown quantity in the corporate world. I scanned the faces quickly, noting Thomas Barrett, head of investment banking and Diane's direct boss, watching me with particular intensity. Diane herself was not present, which didn't surprise me. This gathering was for division heads and above. Lawrence guided me to an empty seat at his right hand, a deliberate positioning that immediately communicated my status in the organization. The message was clear. This newcomer has the CEO's ear and confidence. Amber comes to us with an impressive track record of helping organizations navigate digital transformation, Lawrence continued. Her expertise in emerging technologies and change management is precisely what Meridian needs as we position ourselves for the next decade. What followed was a carefully choreographed introduction session, each executive briefly sharing their role and priorities, followed by my overview of the preliminary transformation strategy I'd developed. I kept my presentation concise, focused, on collaboration rather than disruption, emphasizing that my role was to enhance their existing strengths, not replace them. I don't bring answers, I concluded. I bring frameworks for finding answers together. The institutional knowledge in this room is Meridian's greatest asset. My job is to help channel that expertise toward emerging opportunities. By the time the meeting concluded 2 hours later, I'd identified my likely allies. Marcus Reed from Risk Management, somewhat surprisingly, Sophia Patel from Operations, and James Chen from Technology, who seemed genuinely excited about the innovation roadmap I'd outlined. The potential obstacles were equally clear. Thomas Barrett from Investment Banking, Richard Morris from Wealth Management, and several old guard executives who'd spent decades at Meridian. Eleanor Castillo remained inscrutable neutral, though I caught a hint of approval in her expression during my closing remarks. Lawrence walked me to my new office afterward, a corner space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan's skyline. The room had been freshly painted and furnished with sleek, modern pieces that contrasted with the traditional decor throughout the rest of the executive floor. A blank canvas, Lawrence explained, gesturing to the empty walls. I thought you might prefer to make your own mark. It's perfect, I said, setting my laptop on the glass desk. Thank you. Your team is eager to meet you, he continued. I've assembled a core group of 6 direct reports, digital strategists pulled from various divisions. They'll be here at 11. After Lawrence departed, I took a moment to absorb the reality of my new position. The office, larger than my entire first apartment, represented more than a professional achievement. It symbolized a fundamental shift in how I would be perceived, not just within Meridian, but within my family. For the first time, my success would be visible, undeniable, measured in the same currency Diane and my parents had always valued. The thought had barely formed when my assistant, Kevin, knocked on the doorframe. Ms. Collins, I've organized your schedule for the week and prepared briefing materials on your direct reports. He handed me a sleek portfolio. Also, Ms. Harrington stopped by earlier. She asked if you had time for lunch today. I tried to hide my surprise. Did she indicate what she wanted to discuss? No, ma'am. Should I schedule it? I considered declining, using the natural chaos of a first day as an excuse. But something told me postponing this conversation would only make it more difficult. Yes, please. Let's say 12:30. Ask her to suggest a location. Kevin nodded, making a note on his tablet. One more thing. Your parents called the main switchboard this morning asking for your direct line. I've left their message on your desk. After he left, I found the pink message slip. Mom and Dad called. Very excited about your news. Want to plan a celebration dinner. Please call when you can. I set it aside, not yet ready to navigate that particular conversation. First, I needed to establish myself here, to prove to myself and everyone watching that I deserved this position. The meeting with my core team went better than expected. Lawrence had selected individuals with complementary expertise, a digital marketing specialist, a data scientist, a customer experience designer, a financial technology expert, a process improvement engineer, and a change management consultant. All were mid-career professionals with enough experience to be credible, but not so entrenched that they'd resist new approaches. "We've been assembled for 6 weeks," explained Gabriela Santos, the digital marketing specialist who seemed to have naturally assumed a leadership role within the group. "Reviewing systems, interviewing stakeholders, preparing initial assessments for your review." "I'm impressed with your preliminary work," I said, flipping through the comprehensive reports they'd prepared. "You've identified exactly the kind of organizational silos and legacy systems I expected to find." "What we haven't figured out," said Marcus Lee, the financial technology expert, "is how to overcome the cultural resistance. The technical solutions are relatively straightforward. The people's challenges are much more complex." I nodded, recognizing the central challenge of any transformation initiative. That's where we'll focus first. Technology is just enablement. Culture is the foundation. By the time noon approached, we'd outlined an ambitious but realistic 30-day assessment plan. The team would divide Meridian's operations into 6 domains, conducting deeper analysis of digital readiness and transformation potential in each area. "One more thing before we wrap up," I said as they gathered their materials. "I want to address the elephant in the room. Yes, Diane Harrington is my sister. Yes, this creates an unusual dynamic, but I want to be absolutely clear. All decisions will be made based on business merit, not personal relationships. I expect the same professional standards from each of you when dealing with her division as with any other." Gabriela nodded, a new respect evident in her expression. "Appreciated. Transparency matters." As they filed out, Kevin appeared in the doorway. "Ms. Harrington suggested 11 Madison for lunch. I've confirmed a reservation." 11 Madison Park, one of New York's most exclusive restaurants, where securing a reservation typically required weeks of planning. Either Diane had called in significant favors, or she was deliberately choosing territory where she felt advantaged. Perhaps both. "Thank you, Kevin. I'll head out shortly." As I gathered my things, my phone buzzed with a text from Taylor. Day 1 as corporate overlord. "How's it going?" I smiled, despite the tension knotting my shoulders. "About to have lunch with Diane at 11 Madison." Her response came instantly. "Power moves on her part. Remember why you're there. Don't let her frame. This is a family drama." Sound advice, as always. I tucked my phone away and headed for the elevator, preparing myself for what promised to be the most complex negotiation of my career. Not with a business rival, but with the sister whose shadow I'd finally stepped out from under. 11 Madison. Park occupied a soaring Art Deco space with 35-foot ceilings, massive windows, and an atmosphere of refined exclusivity. The maitre d' recognized Diane immediately, greeting her by name before leading us to a prime table overlooking Madison Square Park. "Ms. Harrington is one of our most valued guests," he informed me with practiced deference. "We've prepared a special tasting menu for your lunch today." Diane sat with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to moving through elite spaces. She wore a crimson sheath dress beneath a tailored black blazer, her chestnut hair arranged in a sleek updo that emphasized her patrician features. "I took the liberty of ordering for us," she said as a sommelier approached with a bottle of Montrachet. "They do an abbreviated tasting menu for business lunches, only 5 courses instead of 11. I noted the subtle power play, orchestrating every detail of the encounter, from the difficult-to-obtain reservation to the pre-selected menu, positioning herself as the insider, the expert, the one in control. "I appreciate the invitation," I said neutrally as the sommelier poured wine into crystalline glasses. "Though I'm surprised you suggested meeting so soon." Diane took a deliberate sip of her wine. "I saw no benefit in prolonging the inevitable. We need to establish parameters for our professional relationship moving forward." "I agree." "Good. Then let me be direct. Your appointment has created significant disruption within my division." Thomas Barrett is concerned about potential reorganization that might diminish investment banking's traditional autonomy. Several of my team members are anxious about how your innovation initiatives might impact their roles. And frankly, my own position has been complicated by speculation about our personal relationship. The first course arrived, a delicate arrangement of heirloom vegetables from the restaurant's rooftop garden, each transformed through different preservation techniques. I waited until the server departed before responding. All valid concerns during any leadership transition, I acknowledged. But I wonder how much of this anxiety existed before my appointment was announced, and how much has been amplified by your reaction to it. Diane's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. If you're suggesting I've been unprofessional, I'm not. I'm simply observing that organizational perception is often shaped from the top down. If you've communicated wariness or resistance, your team will naturally mirror that stance. She set down her fork with precise control. What exactly did you expect? That I would celebrate being outranked by my younger sister who has zero experience in institutional finance? I expected professionalism, I replied evenly. The same professionalism I intend to bring to our working relationship. Something flashed in Diane's eyes. Hurt, perhaps, or frustration at my refusal to engage in emotional combat. She took another sip of wine, using the moment to recalibrate. Let's be practical then, she continued. How do you envision this working? Will you recuse yourself from decisions directly affecting my division? Will there be special protocols for our interactions? No special protocols, I said firmly. That would only reinforce the perception that our relationship creates irregular circumstances. I'll evaluate investment banking's innovation needs with the same objectivity I bring to every division. All recommendations will be data-driven and subject to the same oversight from Lawrence and the board. The second course arrived. Sea scallops with fermented apple and horseradish snow. Diane waited again for privacy before continuing. And if we disagree on strategic direction, then we'll debate the merits professionally, just as I would with any division head. You'll have every opportunity to make your case, but ultimately, innovation strategy falls under my purview. Just like that? Diane's laugh held no humor. 34 years of complicated history set aside for organizational clarity? I set down my utensils, meeting her gaze directly. Our history makes this challenging, yes. But that history is also why I believe we can navigate it successfully. We know each other, Diane. Beyond the corporate titles and polished personas, that knowledge can be an asset if we choose to use it constructively. Something shifted in her expression. A momentary softening before her professional mask reasserted itself. You've always been an idealist, she said, but the edge had left her voice. And you've always been pragmatic, I countered. Between your practical understanding of Meridian's traditional business and my vision for its digital future, we could create something remarkable. But only if we move past the personal competition that's defined our relationship for too long. The sigh. Third course appeared, butter-poached lobster with charred leeks. We ate in thoughtful silence for several minutes, the underlying tension between us easing slightly with each passing moment. I spoke with Mom yesterday, Diane finally said. She's planning a celebration dinner for you next weekend at Le Bernardin. Dad's flying in from Phoenix. I saw their message. They're quite proud, she added, studying her plate. Dad called it extraordinary that you've reached the C-suite at your age. The observation hung between us, a tacit acknowledgement that our parents' approval, which Diane had exclusively possessed for so long, had suddenly shifted. I felt no triumph in this, only a quiet sadness for how much validation had shaped both our choices. Will you attend? I asked. Would you want me to? The question contained more vulnerability than anything she'd said so far. For a moment, I glimpsed the Diane who existed beneath the achievement and ambition, the sister who had once placed band-aids on my skinned knees, who had taught me how to negotiate for a higher allowance, whose approval I had sought long after I'd stopped expecting to receive it. Yes, I said simply. I would. She nodded, neither committing nor refusing, then deliberately shifted the conversation back to safer territory. I've reviewed your preliminary assessment plan for investment banking. The approach is more thoughtful than I expected. Thank you, I replied, recognizing the small concession for what it was, a tentative step toward professional respect. Your team has requested access to our client engagement data and technology utilization metrics. Thomas is concerned about confidentiality. All data will be aggregated and anonymized, I assured her. We're looking for patterns and opportunities, not evaluating individual performance. Diane considered this, then nodded. I'll support the request with Thomas, but I'd like my team included in the analysis process. They understand our client needs in ways that digital strategists might miss. Of course, this shouldn't be adversarial. The most successful transformations happen through collaboration, not imposition. The fourth course arrived, aged duck with lavender honey and autumn fruits. As we ate, our conversation gradually transitioned from guarded negotiation to something resembling a normal professional discussion. Diane outlined the specific challenges her division faced in adapting to digital expectations from institutional clients. I shared insights from similar transformations I'd guided at other financial organizations. By the time dessert was served, a deconstructed cheesecake with Concord grape and walnut, something had fundamentally shifted between us. Not friendship, certainly not yet, but a cautious mutual respect that felt like the first foundation stone of a new relationship. One last thing, Diane said as we waited for the check. Nathan's hosting a gathering at our summer house in Sag Harbor this weekend. Key Meridian executives, some significant clients, a few financial journalists. It would make sense for you to attend. I recognized the invitation for what it was. Not just a professional courtesy, but a public acknowledgement of my position. Thank you. I'd be happy to join. As we exited the restaurant, stepping into the autumn sunshine of Madison Square Park, Diane paused. This isn't going to be easy, you know. There's too much history between us to simply reset overnight. I don't expect easy, I replied, but I do expect progress. We both have too much to offer Meridian to let our personal dynamic undermine the company's transformation. For the first time that day, Diane's smile reached her eyes. Always the optimist. Someone in the family has to be. We parted with a formality that belied the complexity of our conversation, a professional handshake, promises to follow up on specific action items, the careful choreography of colleagues rather than sisters. But as I watched her walk away, head high and shoulders back in that posture of determined confidence she'd perfected since childhood, I felt something unexpected, a strange mixture of pride and empathy. The competitive tension that had defined our relationship for decades hadn't magically dissolved over lunch. The wounds of diminishment and comparison wouldn't heal in a single conversation. But we had taken the first steps toward something new, a relationship based on mutual respect rather than rivalry, on collaboration rather than competition. As I headed back to Meridian, I realized that the most challenging aspect of my new role might not be driving organizational change or overcoming technological resistance. It might be navigating this delicate recalibration with Diane, finding a way to honor our shared history while creating a new future, both professionally and personally. The real transformation had only just begun. Diane's Sag Harbor home embodied the same careful curation as everything else in her life, a meticulously restored 19th century captain's house overlooking the bay, its weathered shingles and white trim perfectly maintained to suggest old money rather than new wealth. As my Uber pulled into the crushed shell driveway that Saturday afternoon, I counted at least 20 luxury vehicles already parked in neat rows, Range Rovers, Mercedes, and sleek Porsches that collectively represented the upper echelon of Meridian's power structure. I'd debated extensively what to wear, finally settling on white linen pants, a pale blue cashmere sweater, and minimal jewelry. Casual enough for a weekend gathering, but refined enough to command respect. My hair fell in loose waves around my shoulders, a deliberate contrast to the structured styles I'd adopted for the office that week. Nathan greeted me at the door, martini in hand. I'd met Diane's husband several times at family gatherings, but had never quite warmed to his particular brand of financial elite swagger. "The innovation guru arrives," he announced, loud enough for nearby guests to overhear. "Diane said you'd be joining us. Quite the career leap, isn't it? From startup consultant to C-suite in one bound." His tone carried the faintest edge of condescension, the implication that my appointment was somehow unearned or irregular. "Evolution, not revolution," I replied with a practiced smile. "Though I suppose dramatic transformations make better." "Cocktail party conversation," he laughed, caught off guard by my directness. "Touché. Diane's on the back deck. Drink? Sparkling water with lime, please." The house opened into a great room with soaring ceilings and panoramic views of the bay. About 40 people mingled in small clusters, the murmur of conversation punctuated by occasional laughter. I recognized several faces from Meridian: Thomas, Barrett deep in conversation with Lawrence near a stone fireplace, Eleanor Castillo examining a maritime painting with Marcus Reed, various division heads and senior VPs scattered throughout. Lawrence spotted me first, raising his glass in acknowledgement, before excusing himself from Thomas. "Amber, glad you could make it," he said, crossing the room to join me. "Quiet the power gathering, isn't it?" Indeed. I didn't realize Nathan and Diane entertained Meridian colleagues so frequently. Lawrence's expression turned thoughtful. "The lines between professional and social have always been blurry in finance. Some of Meridian's most significant decisions have been made on golf courses and sailboats rather than in boardrooms." He gestured subtly toward a silver-haired man holding court near the French doors. "Harold Blackwell, our largest individual shareholder. Nathan manages his family office accounts." I absorbed this information, understanding more clearly why Diane had included me in the invitation. This wasn't merely a social gathering, it was an extension of Meridian's power dynamics, an informal arena where influence was cultivated and alliances formed outside official channels. "How was your first week?" Lawrence asked, guiding me toward a quieter corner. "Productive," I replied. "My team has already initiated the division assessments. We should have preliminary findings by Wednesday." "And Diane? I heard you had lunch." "We've established a professional framework for moving forward. It's evolving." Lawrence nodded, seemingly satisfied with my diplomatic response. "Good. Because Harold has specifically asked to meet you. He's quite interested in our digital transformation strategy." Before I could respond, Nathan appeared with my sparkling water. "Lawrence, you're monopolizing our newest executive. Harold's been asking for an introduction." The next hour passed in a whirlwind of introductions and carefully calibrated conversations. I moved through the gathering with practiced ease, discussing blockchain applications with Meridian's head of emerging markets, debating AI ethics with a financial journalist from Bloomberg, outlining my vision for personalized client experiences, to a skeptical wealth management director. Throughout it all, I was acutely aware of Diane watching from across the room as she played hostess, her expression unreadable, but her attention unmistakable. She had changed since our lunch, softened somehow, though I couldn't quite identify how or why. As the afternoon light began to fade, casting long golden rays across the polished hardwood floors, Nathan announced that cocktails would continue on the deck while dinner was prepared. The crowd shifted accordingly, migrating toward the expansive outdoor space overlooking the water. I found myself momentarily alone in the great room, taking a brief respite from the constant performance of a confident executive. Through the French doors, I could see Lawrence deep in conversation with Harold Blackwell, their expressions serious despite the social setting. Exhausting, isn't it? I turned to find Diane beside me, a glass of white wine in her hand. The constant calibration, she continued. Knowing exactly how confident to appear without seeming arrogant, how innovative without threatening, how approachable without sacrificing authority. I nodded, surprised by her perceptiveness. The executive tightrope. You've been walking it longer than I have. Yes, but you've always had a natural ease with people that I've had to work at. There was no bitterness in her observation, just a simple acknowledgement of difference. Harold is impressed, by the way. He told Nathan your perspective on digital banking is refreshingly pragmatic. High praise from a traditional investor. The highest. Diane sipped her wine, her gaze drifting to the water visible beyond the deck. Mom called this morning. She wanted to make sure I was handling things appropriately regarding your new position. I couldn't help but smile at the phrasing so characteristic of our mother. And what did you tell her? That we're professionals navigating a complex situation with appropriate boundaries. Diane's lips curved slightly. I didn't mention the complete rescheduling of my Friday to accommodate your team's assessment interviews, or Thomas Barrett's 20-minute rant about digital disruption threatening core banking functions. I appreciate that. A comfortable silence settled between us, perhaps the first in years that wasn't charged with unspoken competition or judgment. I spoke with Nathan last night, Diane said finally, her voice softer than usual, about your comments at lunch, about how our relationship has been defined by competition for too long. I waited, sensing she needed space to continue at her own pace. He said something that surprised me. He said, I talk about you constantly. Your unconventional career choices, your willingness to take risks, your ability to see market shifts before they happen. He said he's always wondered if I secretly admired your path while claiming to dismiss it. The admission hung in the air between us, vulnerable and unexpected. Did you? I asked quietly. Diane's gaze remained fixed on the water. I think I envied your freedom, the courage to define success on your own terms. She turned to face me fully, but I also resented it. Every time you walked away from convention, it highlighted how I bound myself to it. The honesty took my breath away. Not just the admission itself, but the self-awareness behind it. I never saw it that way, I said carefully. I always thought you pitied my choices, that you saw me as directionless or unsuccessful because I wasn't climbing the same ladder. You were. I did, sometimes. Diane's candor was startling. It was easier than admitting I sometimes wondered if I'd chosen the wrong path. If all the sacrifice and stress and politics were worth the corner office and country house. And now? I asked. Now, I'm trying to see beyond the binary, your way versus mine. I'm trying to recognize that different definitions of success can coexist without threatening each other. Beyond the French doors, guests mingled on the deck, oblivious to the profound exchange happening just inside. Nathan caught Diane's eye, gesturing that they were needed outside. We should join the others, she said, straightening her shoulders and reclaiming her hostess persona. But before turning away, she added, You belong here, Amber. Not because you've finally achieved a title our parents can brag about, but because you've always belonged, on your own terms. I just couldn't see it before. As we stepped onto the deck together, senior executives of the same institution, sisters with shared history but different paths, something fundamental had shifted. Not a complete reconciliation, not yet, but the recognition that perhaps the greatest transformation ahead wasn't Meridian's digital strategy, but our relationship itself. The sunset painted the bay in shades of amber and gold, a backdrop so perfectly aligned with the moment it almost seemed orchestrated. Lawrence raised an eyebrow at our unified appearance, while Thomas Barrett's expression registered surprise and faint concern. Eleanor Castillo simply nodded, as if confirming a prediction she'd made long ago. Ladies and gentlemen, Nathan announced, raising his glass. Dinner is served. We're seated on the enclosed porch. Please find your place cards. As we made our way toward the dining area, Harold Blackwell fell into step beside me. Ms. Collins, I understand you're leading Meridian's digital transformation. I'd be interested to hear more about how you see traditional banking evolving in the next decade. I glanced at Diane, who nodded slightly, her way of acknowledging that this conversation could significantly impact Meridian's future and, by extension, both our careers. Actually, I replied, I believe the most successful approach combines innovation with tradition. Perhaps Diane could join us. Her perspective on institutional client needs would complement my digital framework. Harold seemed surprised but pleased by the suggestion. Excellent idea. Both Harrington sisters at once. This should be illuminating. As we took our seats at the dinner table, placed side by side rather than opposite each other, I felt a quiet certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them differently than before, not as rivals in an endless competition, but as allies with complementary strengths. The real work was just beginning. 3 months after that pivotal weekend in Sag Harbor, I stood in the private dining room at Le Bernardin, watching a very different gathering unfold. The space glowed with soft amber lighting, white orchids adorned each table, and the quiet hum of conversation blended with gentle jazz playing in the background. This wasn't a standard corporate event. Lawrence had insisted on hosting this dinner to celebrate the official launch of Meridian's Digital Transformation Initiative, a comprehensive strategy that had received unanimous board approval after Harold Blackwell voiced his enthusiastic support. You've managed the impossible, Eleanor murmured, appearing beside me with 2 flutes of champagne. She handed one to me. 3 months ago, half the executive team viewed innovation as a threat. Now they're fighting to have their divisions prioritize for digital enhancement. I accepted the champagne with a smile. The credit isn't mine alone. No, Eleanor agreed, her gaze drifting across the room to where Diane stood chatting with Marcus Reed and Sophia Patel. Your sister has been surprisingly instrumental in bringing the investment banking division on board. Thomas Barrett still grumbles, but he's lost his strongest internal advocate for resistance. The relationship that had evolved between Diane and me over the past 3 months defied simple categorization. We weren't best friends. Too much history and inherent difference in our personalities prevented that level of closeness. But we had developed something perhaps more valuable, a professional partnership built on mutual respect and complementary strengths. Did you ever imagine this outcome when you accepted the position? Eleanor asked, studying me with her characteristic directness. Not precisely, I admitted. I expected professional challenges. I didn't anticipate personal growth. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. The most profound transformations often happen where we least expect them. Across the room, my parents had arrived. My father in a perfectly tailored suit, my mother elegant in midnight blue silk. They moved through the gathering with obvious pride, introducing themselves as Amber and Diane's parents, rather than identifying us separately by our accomplishments. Subtle but significant shift. Lawrence clinked a spoon against his glass, gathering everyone's attention. Before our meal is served, I'd like to say a few words. He gestured for me to join him at the front of the room. As I made my way through the gathered executives, clients, and financial journalists who had been invited to the celebration, Diane caught my eye. She offered a small smile, not the practiced social expression she'd perfected for professional settings, but something genuine and warm. 3 months ago, Lawrence began once I stood beside him, I announced the creation of a new role at Meridian, Chief Innovation Officer. Many questioned this decision. Innovation has become something of a buzzword in financial services, with more promise than concrete results. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. What Meridian needed wasn't just digital tools or updated systems, he continued. We needed cultural transformation, a fundamental shift in how we approach change itself. He turned toward me. Amber Collins brought not just technical expertise to this challenge, but a remarkable ability to bridge diverse perspectives. The strategy we're celebrating tonight represents not one vision but many, woven together into a cohesive path forward. Applause filled the room. I caught sight of Harold Blackwell nodding approvingly from his seat at the front table. "I'd like to invite Amber to share her thoughts," Lawrence concluded, stepping aside. I hadn't prepared formal remarks, believing this gathering was primarily Lawrence's show. But as I surveyed the room, filled with people who had initially regarded me with skepticism but now looked on with genuine respect, I knew exactly what needed to be said. Transformation isn't about replacing what exists with something entirely new, I began. It's about honoring the foundations while building toward the future. What we've developed together isn't my innovation strategy. It's Meridian's, shaped by institutional knowledge and enriched by fresh perspectives. I paused, gathering my thoughts. The most powerful innovations happen at intersection points, where different viewpoints converge and challenge each other. Over the past 3 months, I've witnessed that dynamic throughout Meridian. But perhaps most remarkably with the investment banking division. I gestured toward Diane, who straightened slightly in surprise. Diane Harrington and her team epitomize the balance we've tried to strike, preserving the client relationships and expertise that have defined Meridian's success while embracing new approaches that will secure our future. I'd like to invite Diane to join me in sharing how investment banking has contributed to our transformation roadmap. The invitation was spontaneous, unplanned, a public acknowledgement of Diane's contribution that I hadn't discussed with Lawrence beforehand. AI. Momentary flicker of surprise crossed her face before she composed herself and moved forward to join me. As she approached, memories cascaded through my mind. Diane helping me prepare for my first job interview, teaching me to negotiate salary terms, critiquing my presentation style with brutally honest feedback that had stung at the time but ultimately made me more effective. Despite our complicated history, despite the competition and comparison that had characterized our relationship for so long, she had shaped my professional identity in ways I was only now fully recognizing. "Thank you, Amber," Diane said as she reached the front, her voice steady and clear. When Lawrence first announced the creation of the Chief Innovation Officer role, many of us in traditional banking divisions viewed it with apprehension. A knowing chuckle rippled through the audience. We feared disruption without purpose, change that might erode the foundation we'd spent decades building. She turned slightly to face me rather than the audience. What we discovered instead was partnership, a transformation approach that valued our expertise while challenging our assumptions. That preserved what works while reimagining what could be better. The authenticity in her voice caught me off guard. This wasn't the polished corporate speech I'd expected, but something more personal. In the process, she continued, I've been reminded that innovation isn't just about technology, it's about perspective. The willingness to see familiar challenges through new eyes. Her gaze held mine steadily. Sometimes the most valuable insight comes from someone who approaches problems differently than you do, someone who complements your strengths with their own. The subtext was clear to me, if not to everyone in the room. Diane wasn't just talking about our professional collaboration, but acknowledging the fundamental shift in our personal relationship. As we stood together, co-presenting the next phase of the transformation initiative, I felt a sense of completion that transcended professional achievement. The journey that had begun with that painful introduction at Diane's party, the unsuccessful one, had evolved into something neither of us could have anticipated. Genuine mutual respect. Later, as dinner concluded and guests began to depart, my parents approached us. Mom embraced me first, then Diane, pulling us both close. I never thought I'd see this day, she said, her voice thick with emotion. My girls, working together, each brilliant in her own way. Dad cleared his throat, uncharacteristically sentimental. Your mother and I owe you both an apology. We spent Too many years measuring your success by the wrong metrics, comparing you when we should have been celebrating your differences. Diane and I exchanged glances, equally surprised by this unexpected acknowledgement. Better late than never, Diane replied with gentle humor. As the evening wound down, Diane and I found ourselves alone for a moment on the restaurant's small terrace, the New York skyline glittering before us like a constellation of earthbound stars. That was unexpected, I said. You bring Mom and Dad around to a more expansive definition of success. Diane smiled. I can't take credit. I think seeing us work together, seeing how our different strengths created something neither could accomplish alone, shifted their perspective naturally. Still, I insisted, 3 months ago, I couldn't have imagined this outcome. 3 months ago, I introduced you as the unsuccessful one. Diane acknowledged, the memory no longer carrying its former sting. I was wrong, not just about you, but about what success actually means. She turned to face me fully, her expression more open than I could remember seeing since childhood. You know what the real irony is? I've spent a decade at Meridian climbing the ladder, playing by every rule, measuring my worth in promotions and bonuses. You followed your own compass, defined success on your own terms, and ended up as my boss anyway. We both laughed, the sound carrying into the night air. Life does have a sense of humor, I agreed, though I prefer to think of us as partners now, not boss and subordinate. Diane raised her champagne glass. To partnership, then, professional and personal. As we clinked glasses, I felt the last remnants of old resentments and rivalries dissolve, replaced by something stronger and more enduring. The transformation was complete, not just Meridian's digital strategy, but the relationship that had once seemed beyond repair. To transformation, I countered, in all its unexpected forms. 1 year after the night Diane introduced me as the unsuccessful one, I stood at the podium in the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, surveying a room filled with New York's financial elite. The Financial Innovator of the Year award gleamed on the lectern before me. Recognition not just of my personal achievement, but of Meridian's remarkable transformation. The digital strategy we'd implemented had exceeded even Lawrence's ambitious projections. Client retention had increased by 22%, operational costs had decreased by 18%, and our market share in previously untapped demographics had grown exponentially. More importantly, Meridian had shed its reputation as a staid traditional institution and emerged as a financial innovation leader. This recognition belongs to the entire Meridian team, I said into the microphone, the final words of my acceptance speech. Particularly to those who understood that meaningful transformation requires both radical vision and deep institutional knowledge. Innovation thrives at the intersection of tradition and disruption, a lesson I've learned both professionally and personally. My gaze found Diane at Meridian's table, seated beside Lawrence and Eleanor. She nodded slightly, acknowledging the subtle reference to our journey. As applause filled the ballroom, I returned to my seat, placing the Crystal Award beside my dessert plate. My phone buzzed with a text from Taylor. Watching the live stream, killed it. Meet tomorrow to discuss that offer? The offer she referenced had arrived unexpectedly 3 weeks earlier, an opportunity to join a prestigious venture capital firm specializing in financial technology. The role would allow me to shape multiple organizations rather than focusing on just one, expanding my impact across the industry. I hadn't mentioned it to anyone at Meridian yet, not even Diane. After the ceremony concluded, well-wishers surrounded me, competitors offering congratulations, journalists requesting interviews, potential clients seeking introductions. Eleanor appeared at my elbow, expertly extracting me from a particularly persistent hedge fund manager. Impressive speech, she said as we moved toward a quieter corner. Though I noticed you avoided mentioning your plans for the coming year, I raised an eyebrow. My plans? Eleanor's knowing smile never failed to unnerve me slightly. Lawrence may be focused on quarterly results, but I keep my ear to the ground. Blackstone Ventures has been quite public about their intention to expand their fintech portfolio with expert leadership. Of course she knew. Eleanor had an uncanny ability to sense shifts before they happened, a quality I'd come to deeply respect. I'm exploring options, I admitted. Nothing decided yet. Diane knows, I assume? I hesitated. Not yet. I wanted clarity before having that conversation. Eleanor studied me thoughtfully. A year ago, would you have hesitated to pursue a new opportunity because of how it might affect your sister? No, I acknowledged. I wouldn't have considered her at all. Progress, Eleanor observed simply. The Meridian car service took me home to Brooklyn after the awards dinner. My neighborhood had changed little in the past year, though my apartment now featured better furniture and art collected from my increasingly frequent business travels. The essential character remained the same, my sanctuary away from the corporate world where I could simply be myself. I kicked off my heels and stepped onto my small garden patio, breathing in the night air scented with the herbs I still somehow found time to tend. The contrast between this quiet space and the opulent ballroom I'd just left struck me as perfectly symbolic of my life now, bridging different worlds rather than being forced to choose between them. My doorbell rang unexpectedly. Through the peephole, I saw Diane, still in her formal gown from the ceremony. "Congratulations again," she said when I opened the door. "Though I'm not sure Innovator of the Year fully captures the magnitude of what you've accomplished." I gestured to her inside. "What brings you to Brooklyn? Shouldn't you be at the after-party? With Nathan and the board members?" "Nathan's handling the obligatory socializing." She glanced around my apartment with genuine interest rather than the veiled judgment of previous visits. "Besides, I thought this conversation should happen in person." "What conversation?" Diane settled onto my sofa, looking oddly comfortable in my space. "Blackstone Ventures offered to head their new fintech investment division." I stared at her, momentarily speechless. "How did you—" "Sarah Jenkins is on their board. We were in the same MBA cohort." Diane's smile held no resentment, only a sort of rueful amusement. "Investment banking is a small world." I sank into the chair opposite her. "I was going to tell you once I'd decided. I'm still weighing the opportunity." "I know." She leaned forward, slightly. "That's why I'm here. Not to pressure you either way, but to make sure your decision isn't influenced by concern about how it might affect me or our working relationship." The thoughtfulness of this gesture, so different from how we'd interacted for most of our lives, caught me off guard. "Meridian has been transformed," Diane continued. "The foundation you've built will sustain our digital strategy regardless of whether you're in the C-suite or advising from a VC perspective. Your legacy is secure." "It's not just about the work," I admitted. "It's about us. This past year has been healing." Diane nodded, understanding without need for elaboration. "That healing isn't dependent on sharing an employer, Amber. We've found our way back to being sisters. Real sisters, not competitors. That continues regardless of your professional path." The simple truth of her statement settled over me like a revelation. Our reconciliation wasn't bound to our professional proximity. The growth we'd experienced wasn't contingent on organizational charts or reporting structures. "I haven't decided yet," I said honestly. "But thank you for this." Diane stood, smoothing her gown. "Whatever you choose, I'll be at your next award ceremony," cheering embarrassingly loudly and telling anyone who'll listen that the extraordinary Amber Collins is my sister. As her car pulled away from the curb, I felt an unexpected lightness. The journey that had begun with a painful introduction had evolved into something neither of us could have anticipated. A relationship strong enough to withstand change, resilient enough to survive separation if my path led elsewhere. The unsuccessful one had become the award-winning innovator. Yes. But more importantly, the rival had become the ally, the competitor had become the supporter, the sister had become the friend. Some transformations exceed even the most ambitious expectations. 6 months after the awards ceremony, spring sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new office at Blackstone Ventures. The space occupied the entire 38th floor of a sleek glass tower in Hudson Yards, offering panoramic views of the city I'd called home my entire life, yet somehow making it look entirely new from this vantage point. After weeks of deliberation, I had accepted their offer to head their fintech investment division. The opportunity to shape multiple organizations rather than focus on just one had proven too compelling to decline. Lawrence had been disappointed but understanding, Eleanor unsurprised, and my team supportive despite their obvious sadness at my departure. Diane had been true to her word. Our relationship had not only survived the transition, but somehow deepened through it. We now met for lunch every other week, a tradition that had begun casually, but evolved into a standing commitment neither of us was willing to break. A knock on my door interrupted my thoughts. My assistant, Rachel, poked her head in. "You're two." "O'clock is here. The Finley brothers?" "Send them in," I replied, gathering the materials I'd prepared for this meeting. The Finley brothers, identical twins, in their early 30s with matching auburn hair and earnest expressions, had developed an AI-driven financial advisor app designed to make wealth management accessible to people traditionally overlooked by financial institutions. Their technology was impressive, but what had captured my attention was their mission: democratizing financial expertise. It resonated with my own belief that innovation should expand access, not restrict it. "Ms. Collins," the slightly taller twin began as they settled into chairs across from me. "Thank you for seeing us. We've followed your work at Meridian closely. Your digital transformation framework became required reading in our development team," his brother added. I smiled, gesturing toward the presentation materials they'd brought. "I'm more interested in your vision than my past work. Walk me through what you're building." For the next hour, they outlined their platform, their user acquisition strategy, and their revenue model. The technology was solid, though not revolutionary. What set them apart was their clear passion for serving underbanked communities and their deep understanding of the barriers preventing financial inclusion. "Your approach is compelling," I said as they concluded. "But I have one significant question. Why seek venture funding now? Your current growth metrics suggest you could continue bootstrapping successfully." The brothers exchanged glances. "Scale," the first twin answered. "We've proven the concept works in 3 test markets. To reach the communities that need this most, we need capital for expansion. And expertise," his brother added. "We know how to build technology. We're less experienced with navigating financial regulations across different jurisdictions." I nodded, appreciating their self-awareness. "Blackstone typically invests at later stages, but your mission alignment with our new focus on financial accessibility makes this interesting. I'd like to arrange a follow-up with our due diligence team." After they departed, I turned back to my window, watching clouds cast moving shadows across the Manhattan skyline. The meeting had left me energized in a way I hadn't experienced since my early days at Meridian. There was something deeply satisfying about identifying ventures with genuine transformative potential and helping them navigate the path to success. My phone buzzed with a text from Diane. "Still on for dinner tonight? Mom and Dad insist on celebrating Nathan's promotion." Nathan had recently been named co-head of wealth management at Meridian, a significant advancement that had come, somewhat ironically, through his championing of several digital initiatives I'd put in place before departing. "Absolutely," I replied. 7 p.m. at Le Cuckoo? Perfect. Dad's already practicing his toast. I smiled at the thought of my father, whose pride in his daughter's accomplishments had evolved from comparing our achievements to genuinely celebrating our different paths. As evening approached, I finished reviewing a potential investment portfolio, collected my things, and headed out. Rachel had already departed, but a few analysts remained at their desks, the dedication of early career professionals evident in their focused expressions. "Have a good evening, Ms. Collins," called Zoe Chen, a particularly promising analyst I'd recruited from MIT's financial technology program. "You too, Zoe. Don't stay too late. Brilliant insights rarely come from exhaustion." She smiled, recognizing her own workaholic tendencies. "Speaking from experience?" "Extensive experience," I confirmed, remembering countless nights spent refining strategies and presentations in my early career, driven by a need to prove myself that had often overshadowed the actual work. The spring evening was unusually warm, and I decided to walk part of the way to the restaurant, using the time to clear my head before family dinner. As I moved through the bustling streets, I reflected on the unexpected journey of the past 18 months, from being introduced as the unsuccessful one at Diane's party, to becoming her boss, to finding a new professional path that felt perfectly aligned with my strengths and values. Le Coucou's warm lighting and French Belle Époque atmosphere provided a welcoming contrast to the corporate environments where I spent most of my days. My parents had already arrived, seated at a corner table with Diane and Nathan. "There she is," my father announced, rising to embrace me. "Now we can properly celebrate." The next 2 hours passed in a blur of excellent food, vintage wine, and genuine conversation. Nathan shared amusing anecdotes about adapting to the digital processes I'd implemented. My mother updated us on her retirement plans. My father regaled us with stories from his recent medical conference in Singapore. Through it all, I found myself watching Diane, how she listened attentively to Nathan's work stories, how she asked thoughtful questions about our parents' plans, how she occasionally caught my eye across the table with a look of contented complicity. As dessert arrived, my father raised his glass. "To Nathan's well-deserved promotion," he began, "and to my daughters, who continue to impress and surprise me with their remarkable achievements, each in their own unique way." "Hear, hear," my mother seconded, lifting her glass. Under the table, Diane reached over and squeezed my hand briefly, a simple gesture that conveyed more than words could express. In that moment, I felt a profound sense of completion. The journey, that had begun with painful diminishment, had transformed into mutual respect and genuine affection. Later, as we waited for our cars outside the restaurant, Diane linked her arm through mine. "Remember when we could barely get through a family dinner without competing for attention?" "Vividly," I laughed, though in fairness, I was usually losing that competition. She shook her head. "We were both losing. We just didn't realize it at the time." As my car arrived, Diane surprised me with a quick hug. "Lunch next week? I have a potential collaboration to discuss. Meridian's considering a fintech incubator, and I thought Blackstone might be interested in co-sponsoring." The idea of our professional worlds reconnecting in this new collaborative way felt perfectly right, the final piece of a complex puzzle falling into place. "I'd love that," I replied. "Send me the details." As my car pulled away, I caught one last glimpse of Diane, confident, accomplished, and now secure enough to champion partnership rather than competition. We had both come full circle, finding success not in opposition to each other, but in the strength of our reconnected bond. The unsuccessful one and the overachiever had disappeared, replaced by two women who had finally learned to define success, on their own terms, together and separately. 2 years to the day after Diane's fateful party, I stood on the stage of Columbia Business School's auditorium, facing a sea of eager graduate students. The invitation to deliver this guest lecture had come through Eleanor, who now served as an adjunct professor in addition to her role as Meridian's chief legal officer. "Financial innovation isn't just about technology," I explained, advancing to the final slide of my presentation. It's about reimagining access, redefining value, and recognizing that the most powerful transformations often happen at unexpected intersection points. From the back of the auditorium, I caught Diane's eye. She hadn't mentioned she would attend, but there she sat, notepad in hand, listening with genuine interest rather than the polite tolerance that had characterized our earlier professional interactions. After fielding questions from students, ranging from technical inquiries about blockchain applications to philosophical debates about the ethics of algorithmic decision-making, I gathered my materials as the audience dispersed. "Impressive," Diane said, approaching the stage. "Though you neglected to mention the Meridian Blackstone FinTech initiative in your case studies." I smiled, slipping my laptop into my bag. "Conflict of interest. Can't appear to be promoting my own ventures to impressionable graduate students." Our collaborative project had exceeded all expectations. The incubator Diane had proposed during that family dinner had evolved into a groundbreaking partnership between Meridian and Blackstone, providing capital, mentorship, and institutional support to financial technology startups focused on underserved markets. The Finley Brothers platform had been our first investment, and under our guidance, it had expanded to 12 markets, serving over 350,000 users from communities traditionally excluded from wealth-building opportunities. 3 other ventures had followed, each addressing different aspects of financial inequality through innovative technologies. "Coffee?" Diane suggested, nodding toward the exit. Outside, spring had transformed the Columbia campus into a canvas of green, with cherry blossoms adding splashes of pink against the institution's stately architecture. We found a quiet cafe, on Broadway, claiming a corner table away from the bustling student crowds. "I've been thinking about that night," Diane said after we'd ordered, her expression contemplative. "Which night?" I asked, though I suspected I knew exactly which one she meant. "My housewarming party, when I introduced you as the unsuccessful one." The memory, once painful, now felt distant. A relic from a relationship we had both outgrown. "That feels like a lifetime ago," I remarked. "It was," Diane agreed. "We were different people then. Or perhaps more accurately, we were incomplete versions of ourselves. A barista delivered our drinks, an Americano for me, a chai latte for Diane, preferences we had learned about each other during countless lunches and dinners over the past 2 years. "Do you know what I've realized recently?" Diane continued, stirring her drink thoughtfully. "Success isn't a fixed point or a specific achievement. It's not a title or a salary or even recognition from others." "What is it then?" I asked, genuinely. Curious about her perspective. "It's alignment," she said simply. "Finding the place where your strengths, your values, and your actions converge. Where what you do reflects who you are, not who you think you should be." The insight struck me as profoundly true, not just personally, but professionally as well. The most successful companies I'd worked with through Blackstone were those that maintained this kind of alignment, where mission and method reinforced each other rather than existing in tension. "When did you get so philosophical?" I teased gently. "Probably around the time my little sister became my boss and upended my entire worldview," Diane replied with a smile that held no resentment, only wry self-awareness. We settled into comfortable conversation, sharing updates about our parents, planning a 3-month sabbatical in New Zealand, Taylor, recently made partner at her law firm, and the various projects occupying our professional attention. As we prepared to leave, Diane reached into her bag and pulled out a small wrapped package. "I've been carrying this around for a week, waiting for the right moment." I unwrapped it carefully to find a sleek leather journal, its cover embossed with a simple geometric design. Opening to the first page, I found an inscription in Diane's precise handwriting. "For Amber, my sister and my teacher, who showed me that the most valuable transformation begins with perspective. Here's to writing new definitions of success, together and separately." The unexpected gift caught me off guard, a lump forming in my throat. "Thank you," I managed, running my fingers over the embossed cover. "It's perfect. I thought you might use it for that book you keep talking about," Diane explained. "The one about reimagining financial systems for greater inclusion." "I'm still gathering my thoughts," I admitted. "It's a complex topic. If anyone can make it accessible, it's you," Diane said with a certainty that would have seemed impossible. 2 years ago. Your gift has always been seeing possibilities others miss." As we stepped back onto Broadway, the spring sunlight casting long shadows across the sidewalk, I felt a sense of completion that transcended any single achievement. The journey that had begun with that painful introduction had transformed not just our relationship, but our understanding of ourselves and our individual paths. "Dinner next week?" Diane asked as we prepared to head in opposite directions. She went back to Meridian's headquarters, I to Blackstone's offices. "Nathan's trying out a new recipe he learned in his cooking class. Wouldn't miss it," I replied. We embraced briefly, no longer awkward in our affection, then stepped apart. Two women following separate paths that sometimes converged, sometimes diverged, but always remained connected by something stronger than competition or comparison. As I watched Diane disappear into the crowd, her confident stride carrying her uptown toward the world she had built, I opened the journal to its first blank page. The potential of those empty sheets struck me as the perfect metaphor for the future we were both still writing. Undefined, full of possibility, no longer constrained by old narratives or expectations. The unsuccessful one, the overachiever. Labels that had once seemed to define us, now recognized as the limiting constructs they had always been. In their place, we had found something far more valuable than external validation or professional status, the freedom to define success on our own terms, the wisdom to recognize each other's unique strengths, and the courage to transform competition into collaboration. Some journeys begin with a slight, a dismissal, a moment of painful clarity. But where they lead, that's a story we get to write ourselves, one page at a time, with those who truly see us by our side. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.